Last time I was on the show, I told you we just found out one of our top 10 attackers at the Benghazi attacks was in Afghanistan. His name is Hamza al-Darnawi. While following him, we found actually the number one target of our investigation. So we've never made the number one target of our investigation public. So he's the number one target for stopping them from killing anyone else.
How are you getting the information of them coming up through the southern border?
Well, the one thing is a lot of them just show up in the border, as you can imagine. So we luckily have the counters. The problem is the U.S. government skewing those numbers, right? So when there's counters at the border, they do kind of like Latin American, other, like they don't have it listed by country. So you can't go and look and be like, oh, 1,000 Egyptians came, 2,000 Syrians came, etc. So we're obviously concerned with the terrorists leaving Afghanistan, because what has happened is, as we talked about last time, is, the Taliban is issuing these passports to terrorists, and they're doing two different things. So one is they're just sending fighters, trained fighters. They actually don't have, it's not like the old days, you trained in your little cell and your cell's gonna be deployed and you're gonna do an attack. Al-Qaeda now is just training them and then forward deploying them. And then the interesting part is they are forward deploying senior Al-Qaeda members who will then guide them when they're ready. So Al-Qaeda has taken guys that have been in Al-Qaeda for 20 years, given them Afghan passports. So let's say they took an Egyptian as a good example. He has now an Afghan passport, and they're deploying them to the US, the Middle East, and Europe. And then now they're going to be kind of like the command central for then the terrorists who've all been trained, and then they'll tell them what to do. So I think that's like a really interesting thing. Like we have a change in the terrorist tactics. You're not going to see the cell doing things as you always saw in the past. So I think people need to understand that. And then the other thing is,
before we move on, what are they training on? Is this, I mean, when we would see their training camps before, when the wars were both kicking, it was physical endurance, it was urban kind of warfare, it was shooting. What kind of stuff are they training on now? Do you have any insight into that?
Sure. If we just focus on the Al-Qaeda camps. So in Afghanistan right now, there's 30 Al-Qaeda training camps. 7 of them are suicide bomber only. So 7 of them, you're only in it to be a suicide bomber. The rest of them, it's just your standard. Like I said, there's an urban warfare camp, which I think is for a specific threat. But there's just your usual weapons. There's actually driving training. It's what you'd expect. There is not the IED making, that type of stuff. There's not like a new training piece, if that makes sense. But
same old tactics that we've seen in the war that are coming, but now everybody in America is going to see these tactics carried out at some point.
Yeah, correct. Because remember, back when we had a war with Afghanistan, it was like that country had the weakest passport in the world, right? Now everyone's trying to save Afghans. So all these foreigners now have Afghan passports, and nobody knows they're Afghan. And as we've learned, everyone drops their IDs at the border anyway. You don't know if someone's Iraqi, Syrian, Afghan. I mean, there is like no vetting of these people, right? We don't even know who these people are. And we're not going to be able to vet them anyway, as you can imagine. So if you have 30 new Al-Qaeda training camps, these are all new recruits. Like, people don't understand this, right? This is Mohammed, never been a terrorist in his whole life. His fingerprints aren't in any system. His photo's not in a system. He's not on a U.S. watch list. He's not marked as a terrorist. Even when we have terrorists on watch lists, I think a lot of people don't understand. A terrorist on a watch list does not mean we can get them at a border. So like a really good example is, we talked about Mullah Berader in the past, who I caught. So he spent many years in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, he lived there with a Pakistani passport under a Pakistani identity. So his name is Mohammed Arif, okay? Now, if you look at his Pakistani passport, and he would take that to the southern border, no one would ever know he's Mullah Berader, right? Because the U.S. government had an estimated date for him, so you don't have a date of birth. And then his passport in Pakistan only has a year of birth. I think it was like 1963. That's not useful. The name on the passport's different, so the name you haven't watch listed isn't going to matter. The father's name on the passport's different. The nationality on the passport's different, right? So there is no way if he came to the border as one of the most top 21 terrorists in the world at the time, he would have come in right just fine, and no one would have known they let a terrorist in.
Wow. Man, are you aware of any camps within the U.S., any of these sleeper cells?
I'm not aware of any camps. At least what I know is they're pre-training. At least Al-Qaeda's pre-training. One of the guys we're following is actually doing the passports. Do you want me to get into that
Let's
right
do
now?
it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So obviously last time I was on the show, I told you we just found out one of our top 10 attackers at the Benghazi attacks was in Afghanistan. His name is Hamza al-Darnawi. So we started following him in September. And while following him, we found actually the number one target of our investigation. So we've never made the number one target of our investigation public. So this will be the first time anyone actually hears about him. So when we went to investigate the Benghazi attacks, we had two goals, right? Bring the attackers to justice and stop them from killing anyone else. So he's the number one target for stopping them from killing anyone else. So this individual, his name is Abdul Azim Ali Musa Ben Ali, long name. And then if you're Libyan, he's from the Al-Darsi family. He doesn't use the Al-Darsi as part of his name, but legally it could be. So we just call him Musa for short, me and Boone. So back in the day, he fought like everyone with Al-Qaeda in the Mujahideen era. And then he became a clandestine officer in Al-Qaeda. So what we did in our investigation, we're like, hey, he thinks he's kind of like this undercover CIA guy in Al-Qaeda. Let's follow him that way. So we've never shared publicly that we're following him. The really interesting part is he's had one job forever in Al-Qaeda, and it is to make the fake travel documents for Al-Qaeda's external operatives. So he started all the way back in Afghanistan back in the day. He made the documents for our Benghazi attackers. So we've talked. So what a lot of people don't get is when our Benghazi attacks happen, then a huge chunk of the terrorists went to the airport and got on airplanes. They thought the U.S. military was going to come in and rain hell on Benghazi. They left. So that all their passports were made in advance. A lot of people don't understand this. And actually, one of the people with the fake passports, he was an Al-Qaeda and Iraq guy, got captured in Turkey. And the crazy part is the U.S. didn't ask to extradite him. He got sent to Tunisia, and then he got released, and then our government said, oh, we're following him. They didn't. He killed a couple political leaders in Tunisia, and then he went to Syria, and luckily we ended up getting both him and his brother in strikes in Syria later on, but they were terrorists for many years after Benghazi. Then the crazy part is Musa then went on, and I don't know if you ever remember the name, the Khorasan Group.
Mm-mm.
So basically, kind of around the time of the Benghazi attacks, Al-Qaeda was like, hey, we need to focus all of our external operations into one place, right? Like we need basically a group in Al-Qaeda that only does external operations, so focus on Europe and the US mostly. So it became this Khorasan group. And it was led by a guy named Muslim Fadl. And it became the U.S.'s top priority, as you can imagine, right? It's like, hey, they're going to be the ones doing the attacks. Let's start striking them. And so the U.S. started striking them and basically wiped out the Khorasan groups. Musa was the Khorasan group's sole travel facilitator for Turkey. And most of their travel documents were Turkish, because as you can imagine, Turkey's a really easy travel document to get because of fraud and everything, and it gets you into Europe, right? So he was that group's only trusted facilitator. That's how important he is. Then during this whole time, he's doing AQIM, so Al-Qaeda's North Africa branch, obviously. That's who did our attacks. Then he goes on and starts doing the travel documents for the Al-Badr Brigade. A lot of people don't know what the Al-Badr Brigade is, but if I tell you like what they did, you'll know. So do you remember the Ariana Grande concert?
Mm-hmm.
They did that. Remember the multiple attacks in France when they hit the Bataclan? That was also Al-Badr Mujahideen guys.
Okay.
So they were basically the Libyan terrorists, and a lot of them came from our attacks, that went to Syria And at the time in Syria, you could join 2 terrorist groups. You could join the Al-Nusra Front, and their leader was just killed yesterday, the original leader, actually. Or you can join ISIS, right? So a lot of the ones from Libya steer toward ISIS, but Libyans have this weird thing where they make their own groups. And so the ones who steered toward ISIS instead of al-Nusra started calling themselves the Al-Badr Brigade. So that's where they came from. So anyway, so we have Musa till that point. Okay, and then we lose him in our investigation. So we have him basically, he's in Libya, he's in Syria, he's in Turkey, and he spent some time in France during this, as you can imagine, because there was French attacks. He spent time in Nice. So we lose him completely. So we're thinking he's living just under an assumed identity, since he can make any of them, in Turkey or Syria. So lo and behold, we're following Hamza al-Darnawi, and he goes and sees Musa in Afghanistan. So we find out Musa's been hiding all these years and been protected by the Iranian government in Iran. So he's been in Iran. So of course, then we're like, well, what's Musa doing in Afghanistan? He has to be doing travel documents. So lo and behold, Musa works for Sirajuddin Haqqani in the Taliban's Ministry of Interior, and his sole job is he makes all the fake travel documents for Al-Qaeda's external operatives who are leaving from Afghanistan. So he was involved in Benghazi. He's been ignored since Benghazi, and now he is the one man that knows every terrorist Al-Qaeda is deploying from Afghanistan.
Whoa. And we have no interest in him.
None. And did I not say Sirajuddin Haqqani is his boss, and we're giving Sirajuddin Haqqani money weekly?
Yeah, we're gonna get into that shortly. But
yeah.
I can't. How is this guy not on anybody's radar?
I don't know.
Well, let's get back to the sleeper cells real quick within the U.S. Why do you think we haven't seen anything happen yet? This has been open for years and years. Even before this administration, the border was pretty wide open.
The border was open, but not at the point where 7 million were coming in. And also remember, it wasn't easy for these people to travel from like the Afghanistan border region to here. Now these pipelines are open. Like I told you, there's these illegal flights from India. Those weren't flying, right? There's these routes from, Iran and Turkey and Brazil. Those didn't really exist. Like this is all kind of like a new phenomenon. And so a lot of people don't realize like it's changed. The situation's changed, right? And I don't even think the terrorists put a huge focus on targeting the southern border. You got to remember, a lot of terrorists get in here legally, right? The 9/11 attackers got in here legally. We brought in a lot of terrorists during the Kabul evac illegally. Even, I talk about Mullah Berader, who I captured. So his wife's sister lives in Virginia, and in the last couple of years, the U.S. has let Mullah Berader's wife come to Virginia and see her sister. So the U.S. government has no problem issuing real visas to terrorists, and terrorists know this, right? Especially, Muslim Brotherhood's very involved in this type of stuff. So the southern border wasn't always the biggest focus because we have huge loopholes. I mean, the biggest loophole was obviously student visas. That's what the 9/11 attackers did. We obviously now have a humanitarian loophole, right? We have all these people we're trying to save that, may have been our allies in Afghanistan. So you just have to remember, terrorists take advantage of what is available at the time. Right now, the southern border is the easiest to take advantage of.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.